Hello, everyone, and welcome to Never on the Back Foot. Tonight, we discussed the Sri Lankan team etching their names into the annals of history by clinching the Women's Asia Cup. I think Estelle, will be in a much better position to talk about this triumph. As you can already see, she's very excited with a bright smile. And Estelle is a freelance journalist in sports media. We already have fans lining up to listen from Estelle. So, without further ado, perhaps we can actually dive straight into our topic as well. So, Estelle, when Sri Lanka first won the Women's Asia Cup, we know how the finals was headed, right? A lot of people felt India were overwhelming favorites to kind of win that title, but Sri Lanka just pulled the impossible and a miraculous win, right? So, what were your first thoughts on that win?
I mean, a couple of days later, it's still difficult to understand how they did it, right? Because, like you said, India were overwhelming favorites. I'm telling you, I mean, I hope no one from the Sri Lanka team is listening, but I went into that game 100% certain that we'd be going home with a loss, and I mean, it didn't really. It wasn't such a disappointment because India is such a good team, right? I mean, to me, they're still, despite that performance, still one of the favorites at the World Cup. Very good team all round, but Sri Lanka somehow, it's just one of those things, right? I was talking to someone earlier today as well, just one of those things in sport. It's what makes sport so attractive to a lot of people, right? If the best team won everything, sport wouldn't be as popular. It is these underdog stories, these narratives, these, come from behind unexpected things that make sport so engaging and so great to watch. So I would say, I mean, on that day, I wasn't. I was just pacing around the press box, shaking my head when Kavisha and Harshita were batting, because I couldn't believe what was happening. I mean, yeah, if Atapattu had hit like an 80 or a 90 and Sri Lanka had got home, that would have been something. But when she was dismissed, they needed 72 or 48, and they did it easily, right? Um, yeah, it was just unbelievable. I to be honest, I still haven't watched the live stream of what happened the last delivery. I have the full match downloaded, so I will watch it when I have time. But it was a bit of a blur because things happened so quickly, and in a couple of minutes I was rushing downstairs for interviews and stuff. So everything was a bit of a blur. But yeah, I mean, incredible scenes in Dambula.
Absolutely, and for you, right, who's covering the game and also watching it as a fan, like how was it just like to actually see that Sri Lankan win? What did it mean? And were you able to separate that fan side of you and the expert side of you while you were writing your reports, talking to people, and just kind of processing this win?
It was very tough, I must say. Fortunately, I wasn't writing anything. So basically, this Asia Cup, nobody paid me to cover it. I just went there because I wanted to cover the tournament because Sri Lanka had done so well leading up to a World Cup. I wanted to have those stories with me because I'm hoping to also cover the World Cup in Bangladesh. So I wanted to have those stories with me, and I decided, look, you're never going to get a better chance, right? It's being played in Sri Lanka. You can, go stay in Dabula. Yes, it's not, it's a bit far from home, but it it will be worth it in the long run. So luckily, I didn't have anything that I had to write at that point because I don't know how I would have written a match report. But I did have to kind of come up with questions and stuff for the post match interviews, right? Because in every game, I had to go down, and they had this like unofficial press conference where it was just on the ground, and the winning someone from the winning team would come up, and we'd have these interviews. And for the final, they also had the India coach, right? And there weren't that many, as you would know. There was, I think, one other Indian journalist. So there weren't people who had that many questions. And even the Sri Lankan journalists, a lot of them were more focused on Sinhalese questions. So I had to kind of prepare for that as well. So that part was like, when Harshita came up, I had to kind of really tell myself, you have to focus and get the questions down. So it was tough to separate the fan and the expert kind of thing there. Uh, particularly because I've watched them like from 2017-ish. So, just to see how they've gone. And Harshita is someone I've known before I was in the industry. So it was kind of all of those things in one. So to come back to your question, it was hard, but you have to do, that's the job, right? You have to do it. And that is the most important part about being there, is being able to tell the stories of what is going on, because they are the story. So I had to kind of, put the fan in the back seat for a little while, and get the job done.
Absolutely. And we're waiting, Estelle, whenever you write your report or piece or your feature style piece about this magical find. And I have so many questions to ask you, you know. And let's take a few comments here as well. We have Cricket Datashan, who goes on to add that I heard only four of you were there in the Women's Asia Cup, covering it, including you and Madhushka. So yeah, Estelle, I think this again goes on to prove, right, that there still needs to be a little more like intent from like journalists and media portals to, you know, kind of cover the Women's Asia Cup. Hopefully this will kind of set things better and there will be more media traction perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were a few more people, but I do think from the beginning, like I was there for the pre-tournament press conference and I was there until the end. Nobody stayed the entire tournament. There were four Bangladeshi journalists who were there. And I think someone from female cricket was also there from the beginning. But local journalists, a lot of them preferred to travel in. A lot of them came in at the semi-final point. So you're absolutely right. I think, sometimes there is what I've seen in Sri Lanka is there is also this reluctance to try to, like, people will say, okay, there's no market for women's cricket. But at the same time, sometimes you feel like there's no attempt to see if there is a market for women's cricket. So, when it comes to attracting sponsors, things like that, if you don't go to the market, you won't know whether people want to, are interested in coming on board, right? And I mean, you think about the sponsors who did come in for this tournament. Suddenly, whatever they paid, the value has like quadrupled, right? Because it's been a massive success. So for sure there needs to be a little more, and I'm sure that will come now with Sri Lanka winning. Everyone likes a successful team, right? So um I'm sure that will come now. I'm hoping in Bangladesh there will be a few more Sri Lankan journalists, and I'm really hoping there will be a few more Indian journalists as well, because like I said, India is a really good team. They're in with a huge chance of at least making the final or going all the way. So it was a bit jarring to see there wasn't anybody, just there was just one journalist. But yeah, hopefully there will be a lot more attention and lot more intent from media houses and such to get their journalists at these events.
Yeah, and I think as a Sri Lankan too, you would be hoping that the portals, you know, will now at least wake up and take attention of the Sri Lankan team winning their first ever Women's Asia Cup, which is a massive, massive thing. And even in our comments, right, we have someone say that Chamari deserves a statue outside the Ambula. Definitely, the kind of character she is, Estelle. You know, I'd actually reserve this question for a little later. But just talk to us about Chamari Attappattu, the kind of character she is, the leadership, and just the personality she is. Right, brilliant.
Yeah, she's a very tough character. I think people see her smiling a lot, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, she's come through a lot of stuff, right, with the Sri Lankan team. A long period where they weren't doing anything. I'm sure, which is very frustrating for her, because she was always a very, very good player. And then to not get that support from her team, it would have been very frustrating. I mean, I've seen, times where she's visibly been upset on the field because she's not getting the support she needs. So she's a very strong character. What I feel is now she's really matured into that role as a leader in the team, and she's able to keep her emotions also in check a lot. And I love how she is. I mean, if you look at the Sri Lankan side, you see there are a lot of young players in that side, a lot of players under the age of 25. And I feel that she's very protective of them. And she wants to give them opportunities, but also keep them from, you know, too much criticism or too much negativity. So that's a really good. I mean, I feel that's a really good sign for the game going forward, because, I mean, it's not that players need to be protected overly, but when they're just coming into the side, they need to be given that bit of cushion because, I mean, I'm sure you will know how like social media and the media is not a very friendly place, right? So it's nice to see that from a senior player and someone who has achieved so much in her cricket.
Absolutely, and I think that's what just makes her incredibly special. And just looking at Sri Lanka's triumph, I think, as you rightly pointed out, it was the young players, who kind of stood up, took responsibility, and kind of, orchestrated this win, so to say. So I think this question would make sense here. So, Estelle, are we getting ahead of ourselves, or do you think a plan, for the women's LPL is possible? Like, I'm sure you are pretty much aware of like the depth pool, no, the talent in the depth pool, right, in Sri Lanka. So, are we getting ahead of ourselves here, or is this likely possibility?
No, I was quite skeptical about an LPL a couple of years ago because, like you rightly mentioned, I wasn't sure if Sri Lanka had the depth to conduct an international franchise competition like that. Because, as you know, with women and women's sport, the moment something doesn't look good, it so if a female cricket so if a female commentator says something not quite smart on commentary, what do people say? Women don't know cricket. If a man does it, then it's that particular man doesn't know cricket, right? So similarly with these franchise leagues, there's a huge risk that if you start one and the players aren't that great and the scores aren't that great and the league doesn't go off well, then it's like there's no point investing in women's cricket. That would be the bottom line that comes out of it, right? But I do think now, so SLC has contracted 60 players now, right? So at different levels. Um, and they have invested in emerging teams and under 19 teams and things like that. So I do feel like there is that little bit of depth now, at least at the younger levels, where you could have, I don't know if you could have a full-fledged WPL type tournament, but maybe you start where the CPL and actually the women's Premier League started off like as an exhibition tournament, right? Where you had 3 or 4 teams, you play a couple of games a season, you kind of give even overseas players that taste of, okay, this is what it's going to be like, and then go from there. Because if you don't capitalize now, the question comes like, when is the best time, right? If you don't think now is the best time, then when is the best time? So I do think right now would be a good time to start because you've got the country's attention. You've got, unlike the men's game, you've got a lot of overseas players who don't get opportunities at the big leagues, right? They don't get opportunities at the, I mean, WPL is very, very tough to get in. Um, Big Bash also the same, right? So you have that opportunity, unlike the men's side of things where a lot of players have opportunities. With the women's game, because of that lack, you have a chance of actually attracting some really good players who don't get to play a lot of franchise cricket. So I do think that now would be a good time to start. Maybe start small. You don't have to start it fully fledged, but it would be a good time to start.
Absolutely. Better late than never. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, with the talent pool available as well, probably a few exhibition matches to get the ball rolling eventually and then have a full fledged league is, something that I hope Sri Lanka cricket does invest in. And I think as fans, we wouldn't complain of, any more leagues that already exist. But I think there'll be other logistics they'll have to figure out with the timing, this, schedules and everything.
Yeah.
But even just, dialing our conversation back to the finals as well. Now, when the match was going on, India did not probably have the best of the batting efforts. Putting on that 160 odd was not going to be enough because you were against a spirited Sri Lankan side that, was kind of maybe focused and poised to chase down that total. So talk us through everything that transpired. And at any point, did you feel that, oh no, maybe, Sri Lanka can't chase this down. It's getting a little overwhelming. Or did you always have that belief that, yes, this is going to be our win for sure?
Yeah, first of all, I feel like 160 is a good total, and obviously it's the highest total chase down in a women's T20 competition. But I still think that there were more runs in that pitch for a team batting first. I think with India, with Smriti Mandana getting off to a good start, them having wickets in hand at the end, possibly they would have been looking at a target above 180. Um, 166, like I said, was a good total, but I think they still left a 10 to 15 runs on the board there. When it comes to the bowling, I just think that they didn't do too much wrong. It's just that Sri Lanka had, like, it was just one of those days when the stars aligned, wasn't it? Like, you asked me if there was any point where I thought that Sri Lanka wouldn't chase it. It's funny because that that partnership between Samara Vikrama and Kavisha Dilhari was a blur to me. Because when Atapattu got out with 72 needed of 48, you sense that, this is going south, right? But I mean, you gave a good fight. No one was expecting a win. It was fine. Uh, but just the way they took on things, kind of, I mean, even until the last delivery, it was like, what's going on, right? Because they won it comfortably in the end. So there was always a doubt whether I mean, at the innings break, someone asked me, can Sri Lanka chase this? I think I said, obviously, Atapattu she's got to have a big innings, right? There's no other way that you're scoring 8 and over right throughout the innings if she doesn't get going. But I I genuinely did not expect that from those two, particularly Harshita Samaravikrama, who I've never seen her bat like that. I've never seen her clear the boundary like that. Some of those boundaries, I mean, the hook for six, I've never seen her bat like that. So it was, to me, it was one of those days that, nothing India could have done would have stopped Sri Lanka. It felt like that.
Absolutely, and I think you just covered that beautifully, because it was just one of those days when everything was working out well for Sri Lanka. But what made this win all the more special is that everyone expected India to win, right? Not that the Sri Lanka should lose, but that India will win. But even just looking at the run to the finals, right now, India also had an unbeaten run. So did Sri Lanka, right? Imagine just heading to the finals with that sort of a confidence. You're going against a team like India, but somewhere that self-belief, right? I think that was probably one of the biggest driving forces. But as a Sri Lankan fan and an expert as well, how pleased were you with Sri Lanka, in the lead up to that finals as well?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, with no disrespect meant to any of the other teams, I think anything other than a final would have been a disappointment for Sri Lanka, just because of how well they had done during this year and the maybe the 18 months preceding the tournament, right? They've beaten in England, they've beaten South Africa, beaten West Indies, New Zealand in ODI series, and they were riding high. So, and add to that, maybe Pakistan is the only other team that's really been tough for Sri Lanka to get over the line against in Asia Cups, and they hadn't had a good run into the tournament. So, with all that in mind, I think I certainly was expecting them to make it to the final. Um, so that kind of, those performances were encouraging, but at the same time, it was like, okay, we are where we know we are, but can we beat a team like India? And I think overwhelmingly that answer was no until it actually happened, right? Because genuinely, like, I mean, uh, I know there were a lot of people who were saying online, like, you should just give the trophy to India, and that thought, it's natural that it would cross your mind. I wouldn't recommend tweeting it out before the result, obviously, but those thoughts cross your mind because India's been so good, and on paper, I mean, seriously, look at the records of some of those Sri Lankan batters. Look at Kavisha Dilhari's record in T20 cricket. I think average of 13 or something. You're not looking at those players and thinking they're going to chase 166 down, right? You're thinking, okay, Atapattu gets 80, 90, 100, she bats through the innings, Sri Lanka will chase it. But you're not expecting players like Kavisha Dilhari to come out and play innings like that. So it was, I mean, encouraging that first round, but everyone already knew the big test is just going to be India.
Definitely. And I think this win will, stay with that Sri Lankan side for a very long period of time because who doesn't love an underdog win, right? And I think I'd also like to bring up this comment because it kind of makes sense to our discussion as well. So it goes on to say, will the SLC realize that not organizing enough matches in that 2020-22 period was a wrong decision to hamper the growth of key players like Harshita Samara Vikrama, you have Anushka Sanjeevani, and a lot of them. But during the pandemic, right, I think a lot of cricketing boards did come under the scanner for not hosting enough matches, but Sri Lanka in particular, right? Your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, it was a disaster, wasn't it? I mean, nearly 2 years of no domestic cricket either, right? So nothing. I mean, we talk about the growth of players like Harshita, Anushka. What about a player like Atapattu, who was at her peak, losing two of her best years, right? She's 34 now. At 30 to 32, she missed out on international cricket. It's I I mean, it's a crime, right, when you think about it. But there isn't much you can do about it now. Hopefully, Sri Lanka cricket have understood the importance of the women's team and understood where women's cricket is now, and that you can't get away with doing that sort of stuff. Um, I mean, it was mostly disappointing, I think, because the men were playing cricket. So domestic cricket was happening for men, international cricket was happening. We were hosting um, men's teams over bilaterals. We had the LPL, but no domestic or international cricket for women. So hopefully this is the turning point. I know sometimes it's disappointing that women have to keep proving themselves and have to keep proving that they're worth that investment, but hopefully they've learned from that mistake and it won't happen again. Because like I said, I mean, you can talk about impacting growth of players, but also people who are already at their peak missing out some of the best years. Even players like Udeshika Prabodhini, right? 2 years of her, you know where she could have, and this ultimately affects their bottom line in franchise cricket as well, right? They haven't been playing, they haven't racked up those records and stuff like that. So yeah, I just hope a situation like that doesn't arise again.
Absolutely, because it was really disappointing not to see, Sri Lanka compete in international cricket then. But I think it's the way, they kind of just got back from that setback. I mean, just looking at the kind of results they've had. Let's not look at 2022 and early 2023. Let's look at the time after that because, we had those important bilateral series win versus Bangladesh. Then you had away wins in, England and South Africa quite recently. The ODI series win, versus West Indies, New Zealand, and just the kind of domination carried on, right, to that T20 World Cup qualifiers as well, where Sri Lanka was playing like a team possessed, right? I mean, they just wanted to win everything that came their way, made the most of, game time opportunities and infrastructure. But somewhere, Estelle, you're pleased, right? The kind of direction they are headed in, because every single conversation starts and ends with the World Cup. So, with this kind of momentum, riding in from these wins, now the Asia Cup, you're fairly confident that the team is headed in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't fault the work that has gone in the last couple of years. I think you have to give credit to Sri Lanka cricket. There's been a lot of investment at the lower levels as well, with emerging teams and under 19 teams, facilities for the players, increase in payment, all of that. I am in no way saying that it is where it should be, but there has been a lot of progress in that area, so that is commendable. But I still think, like, 75% of that success is down to the players' pure, I don't know what you call it, right? You spoke about self belief. I think a lot of it is just purely willing themselves into winning situations, because um someone like Atapattu, right? I think all of this started with New Zealand's tour of Sri Lanka in 2023, where Sri Lanka were able to beat them for the very first time. New Zealand is obviously a team in decline, but I think it meant a lot to Sri Lanka that they were able to beat them in an ODI series and enhance their chances of qualifying for the World Cup directly, right? And those wins were purely on the back of Atapattu. I mean, the way she was hitting the ball in that ODI series was kind of unbelievable. Um, and just to go from there, it's just that belief that kept building and building and building and building. That's not to say they don't have skill. I think they always had skill. Um, but it is a mental side of things that was lacking in a lot of ways. I can give you an example, someone like Anushka Sanjeevani. 10 years ago, a lot of people were talking about her in the domestic scene because she's such a good bat, right? And I think when you watch her, you can tell she's a really good bat. But look at her record, right? I mean, I was one person thinking they need to move on from her in 2023 because she's a superb keeper, no doubt about it. Best hands in the game in Sri Lanka. But the batting just wasn't, there was nothing to go off on in international cricket. But suddenly, overnight almost, she's become this incredible batter in the lower middle order, right? So I do think somewhere something flipped a switch mentally for the players. So that I, despite whatever's been going on outside, yes, there's been investment, there's been increments, contracts, all of that, and those are commendable. I think a lot of that credit has to go to the team itself and just their belief and their ability to kind of will themselves to better positions in games.
Certainly, and I think it's interesting, you bring this point of how Sri Lanka is heavily dependent on Chamari to, kind of get those starts, get you those wins and everything. But sometimes I think even the integration of young players into the team has just worked out so seamlessly for them, right? And I think that's where even cricket, that Ashwin's question makes sense here. Sri Lanka has two under 19 superstars in that starting 15. You have Vishmi Gunaratne as well, who's just been making waves in international cricket. Waves is an understatement because, man, I mean, she's just been dominating so much. But Estelle, again, great signs that we have fresh blood who we have fresh players who are being blooded into the senior team, and the transition just seems to be quite seamless, right, at this point.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one because if you look at the Sri Lankan squad, you will see it's divided into two generations, right? And there's a missing generation there. That 26 to maybe 32, there are no players. You've got 32 plus, and you've got less than 26. I think Harshita is 26. So less than 26, but that middle generation is kind of missing. And that's where I think Sri Lanka had that huge slump in international cricket for maybe 2014 onwards, where they weren't winning that many games. But now, with them bringing in a lot of young players, and I like the way they've brought in the young players. Like you have Shashini Gimhan, he's 15 years old, right? But they're not putting her into hugely, pressure situations. A lot of people were talking about will she play against India as like the surprise package, but they just want to blood her slowly, give her enough confidence. I mean, she played against Malaysia, got 3 wickets for 9. Just get her confidence up. I saw her working in the nets with the coach. Just get her confidence up, and there's plenty of time for her to come. They're not trying to, blood her now as a, this mystery bowler. And once she loses that mystery, she's done, right? They want to cultivate her into this, consistently good bowler. And I think that's really good to see. It's similarly with, I mean, Vishmi played at 16, right? International cricket. But she's been stuck with from 16 to 18 now. They've given her continuous opportunities, and I think they've given her that license that, you're in the team. We're not going to switch around and we're not going to mess around with you. We want you to take in whatever experiences you're getting now and continue playing. The spot is yours. So that kind of stability, I think, has been massively important for the young players. Sachin and Isansala, another one, right? In the final, goes for 20 runs, then picks up Harmanpreet, But Atapattu very smartly didn't give her another over because she knew that she would. I mean, she ended her spell with a wicket of Harmanpreet with confidence. And then Atapattu said, okay, I'll finish off your overs, right? So the way they've handled the young players is really good to see. But I do think you're not replacing Atapattu, okay? So once in a generation cricketer, I would say among the probably 5, 6 greatest cricketers to come out of Sri Lanka, considering how she's gone, right, in the last couple of years. So you're not replacing her, like you're not getting a like for like. So when she retires, you're going to have a period where it's going to be tough for Sri Lanka, right? And similarly, there are another few players who it's going to be tough to move on from. So I hope they don't all leave at once, because I mean we are seeing the likes of Karanavira, Oshadi Ranasinghe slowly being kind of sidelined from the team, but they're bringing in the youngsters with still experience in that bowling lineup so that they can kind of assimilate themselves in games that aren't that important, and then come into their own as time goes by. So that transition, I think there's going to be obviously a transition period in the next couple of years, but it's looking promising, kind of the way they've handled the younger players.
Absolutely. And I think even as a Chamari fan myself, I'm not ready for that retirement, Estelle. So let's not talk about it. There was some inklings of like some rumors of her
But
probably retiring.
fortunately, I think, thankfully, Raunak Kapoor, I think the whole cricketing world must be thankful to him. He asked her that question right at the end, and she said, "Okay, I'm playing the 50 over World Cup." So all of us like breathed a sigh of relief, because some of us were wondering whether the T20 World Cup will be her last time with Sri Lanka.
Exactly. And now, considering she is playing till that ODI World Cup, all of us are, just extremely relieved. And I think she still has a lot of years of cricket left in her to, mentor and kind of help the young girls just come back, to come into the team and everything. But even just looking at Sri Lanka's triumph, I think it's important to acknowledge even the role of the coach, right? You have Rumesh Ratnayake, who's been instrumental for Sri Lanka, took over the reins at a very, challenging time. I think enough has not been said about him, Estelle, but talk to us about his role, the kind of impact he's had on the girls.
Yeah, Rumesh Ratnaik is an interesting case because he's had stints with the men's team also as an interim coach. And I do think this was supposed to be an interim appointment, because Hashan Tilakaratna left in October 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And then the World Cup was coming up in February or March of 2023, and they didn't have anybody. And I don't know whether advertisements went out for the position or not. He was at From what I know, he was at the High Performance Center in Colombo, and he was given over the team to kind of be like the caretaker. There was never an official appointment or press release from Sri Lanka cricket that Rumesh Ratnaik is going to be coach. I think I found out because I asked somebody who they're training with. So I don't think it was meant to be this long term thing. But again, like I was saying, that some things have just come together at the right time for Sri Lanka. And I think most importantly, it is his partnership with Atapattu that's working. It is the fact that, I mean, there are some intangibles in sport, right? Like you look at Matthew Mott and Meg Lanning. Matthew Mott, I think, was just sacked from the England men's coaching job, right? And had all that success with Meg Lanning's Australia. So I think it's also that partnership between the captain and the coach, and them buying into each other's roadmap of where they want to go. Rumesh Ratnaik, what I've heard a lot from players is that the environment he's created is very positive. Like they don't talk too much about negatives. I mean, Harshita was talking about, when she dropped the 2 catches in the first innings of the final, uh, going into bat, surely there is a huge amount of pressure on you, right? But that she was told, look, that's done, that's gone, focus on your batting, focus on what is in front of you. And if you think back to the Sri Lankan side from day one, I recall Isabel Joyce, whenever she was at the toss, kept asking Chamari, you've had such a successful run, Is this finally the time where you win an Asian title? And she kept saying, we're not looking at the final, we're looking at this game, we're looking at one game at a time, and we're looking to not take too much pressure onto our heads, just think positively and play positive cricket, right? And that is kind of I mean, it's very easy to say when a team is successful, obviously. So I think that's important to keep in mind. But also that kind of environment they have created where a player can truly play fearless cricket because of the environment created, where they have been given that freedom to play the way they play. Even Anushka Sanjeevani, after the semi-final, I asked her, what did she say to Sugantika Kumari? Because Sugantika Kumari is not a bat, right? She's not a batter. What did she say to her in that moment when Sri Lanka needed 16 of the last two? She said, I just told her, play positive cricket, and whatever needs to happen will happen, right? So that mentality of things will happen the way it's supposed to happen, if you show the correct intent, is that environment created by Rumesh Ratnayaka. And that kind of that confidence, like I said, like players like Anushka Sanjeevani have always been known to be talented, but something has been unlocked in them. And even Atapattu, right? Atapattu was always a very, very good player, but now she is a great player. Now I mean, there will still be people who look at her record and say she's not in the top whatever in the world. But if you put into context the runs she gets and the role she plays for Sri Lanka and what she's done, to me there's no denying, there's no argument that she's one of the greatest players in the game right now, right? So it it is an intangible thing, and it's, like I said, it's very easy to say believe in these things when the team is successful, but he obviously has some kind of thing that unlocks something in players, because he did have success with the men's team also in an interim capacity. So yeah, it can't be understated the role he's played, because if you look back to Hashan Tilakaratne's tenure, there isn't a huge amount of difference in the squads, right? Uh, I mean, the core players are still there who were with Hashan Tilakaratne as well. But like I said, somehow something has been unlocked in them.
That's absolutely right, Estelle, because even though he's the accidental coach, so to say, and we again won't complain if you write an in-depth piece or, exploring his journey with the team. But I think it really matters, the coach and the kind of influence they have. I think time and again, history has given us examples of how the right coach can have that impact. I hope Sri Lanka cricket, continues to persist with him for few more assignments and see where this team kind of goes, because this Asia Cup triumph is, I hope, just that getting that ball rolling to hopefully bigger things. And even just talking about the prize money, right? I read that they received 500,000 US dollars for this glorious performance, which is a massive investment, and is definitely going to help the girls. But Estelle, could you also talk to us about the contract system that is kind of in play? Is it on par with men? Please do shed some light.
Yeah, so I don't have the exact numbers about the contracts, but I do. In my understanding, 60 players are contracted at different levels, of course. I think Atapattu is probably on par with the men, right? I don't know about the amounts the others are getting. In terms of match fees, there's a huge difference. Like the women's team recently there was a news, I think it was last year, that women's match fees tripled, okay? But it went from 250 to 750, so not a huge amount of money, and every win they get a bonus 250. So if they win, they get 1000 USD. I think the men get 3000 for a T20 and 4000 for an ODI. So there's a bit of there's a big difference there. It's not on par. I think it should be at least one of the others should be on par, in my opinion, either the contracts or the match fees. But I still think, I mean, you spoke about the $500,000 that Sri Lanka cricket is giving. It's huge, and it's a huge encouragement, I think, to the players also, because I don't think any of them are doing this with money in mind, right? Because it's not a very highly paid job, or it wasn't a couple of years ago when most of them came into the scene. But I do think the investment also needs to trickle down to the lower levels, where you're paying your domestic cricketers enough that they can make this their profession. um, that would be the most important step. So already I'm hearing, so in the past, like if I go back, uh, I'm not sure how long, how recently this changed, but few years back, domestic cricket is dominated by the forces in Sri Lanka. So you have your navy, air force, army, police, not so much, but those three, right? So they would have multiple teams in division. They'll have one team in division 1, division 2, division 3. They have multiple teams, right? Because what used to happen was, like, I'll take the example of Harshita Samaravikrama, right? Harshita Samaravikrama, as a school girl, played obviously for her school, but she also played for Coles Cricket Club in Colombo. She played there, and what happens is, players like her, they play during their school age, but once they leave school, because they don't have any income from those clubs, they get offered jobs from the Army, Navy, Air Force, right? To play cricket. So they don't get paid. I mean, Coles used to pay, I think, an allowance for traveling and stuff, but nothing substantial, right? But the Navy offers you a proper job. You get your monthly salary, you get all the, benefits of a Navy job, and all you have to do is play cricket. I mean, of course, if you want to move up the ladder in the Navy, you can, go into work and do all sorts of things. But that was how the system was. So a lot of these players, and it's very interesting how, again, uh, kind of the universe works, right? So Harshita's coach at Coles was a liaison officer with the Indian cricket team at the final. So she was there, right? I spoke to her right after the game and said, your player of the match, right? Anyway, so that coaches like that, it used to be superbly, like, frustrating, because they'd build up these players, schoolgirls, and then as soon as they hit 19, 20, they switch over, right? And also what happened was, then the forces teams, they had way too many players to be in the top level. They'd have, like, really good players playing B division or C division as well, right? So now with this contract system that's coming, and that they're paying domestic cricketers a little bit better, what that coach says is, Harshita's coach, Randika Galhenage, she's a former Sri Lanka cricketer as well. What she says is, kids no longer want to join the forces because they're getting a small amount of money playing for these clubs. Now, other clubs, men's clubs, have also started fielding women's teams. So because they're getting even a small income, they don't see the lure of going to one of the forces teams, right? So that's why I say that investment at that domestic level is very, very important, because now that means in a few years the domestic structure is going to be more competitive than it ever was, because you're not going to have that dominance. Like, if you look at the squad right now, most of them play for Navy or Air Force, right? I think you have maybe a couple of players at Army. A lot of them play at Navy, Air Force. Um, uh, I think maybe few years ago, probably 14 out of the 15 played for one of the forces, right? But it's slowly changing because of this payment structure. So those are all good signs. So like I said, the 500,000 is great and they absolutely deserve it. I hope there's also investment in that lower level, so that players can, sustain themselves professionally and, like, keep playing where they need to play, instead of having to, make difficult choices like that.
Again, Estelle, I think you explained that beautifully. A lot of sub stories within, your answer as well. But just to understand this better, like, is pursuing cricket in Sri Lanka for a woman cricketer sustainable? Can they manage with that? And while you answer this, just also talk to us about, like, the grassroots programs, the school structure, and then eventually transitioning to that domestic scene as well. So, other players, who are just so frustrated because somewhere you just can't make your ends meet, but you're so passionate about the game, you just want to keep playing still.
I think it's still difficult. I don't know if you're able to sustain, living a proper life, playing cricket at the domestic level. Certainly, if you make it into the national team, then you're all right. But otherwise, it is still difficult, I think. Uh, it, the grassroots level, if we talk about, it's very funny because the men's and women's school systems are very different. Uh, on the men's side of things, schools cricket is massive. I mean, we have a massive season at the beginning of the year. They play these things called big matches, which are like rivalries between two schools. Huge numbers of people come, bigger than Test cricket, right? Huge numbers of people come for the games. On the women's side of things, the schools that play cricket are hardball cricket are very different. So you don't get that kind of fervor in Colombo for women's cricket. It's a lot fewer the number of teams that play. So the kind of the talent pool coming through is small, right? Because I mean, I think it's this old fashioned kind of idea of leather ball cricket is tough, you'll hurt yourself, all those kinds of things. But also I know that um, there have been a lot of people working in the background, people like Apsari Tilakaratna, Hashan Tilakaratna's wife actually, who was the chief convener for women's cricket at SLC, who was going to different provinces, donating equipment to girls schools and trying to encourage them to get into the game. So that is kind of change, that system where not many schools are playing is kind of changing. But of course, there's still a long way to go. So from schools level, um, I think there are provincial level coaches who they can go to, and then from there they move on to clubs and such. But it's still very much you also kind of need to be a bit lucky to find the right people at the right time and get into those systems, right? Which I think is a universal truth. If you look around the world, right, you do always need that little bit of luck to get your foot in the door. But things are changing. I I don't know if they're changing too slowly, but they are changing.
Absolutely. And I think this win will do a world of good, certainly, because even just looking at where Sri Lanka cricket goes from here, I think just today we had the announcement of that Ireland tour that is coming up, which is again exciting because more game time is something, we definitely want to see. But even just looking at Sri Lanka cricket and how they can do a lot better for their women, with respect to, getting a more robust domestic system, contracts, and, match fees and all of that, but even just organizing more tours perhaps, or having these A tours also, come into play, you think that could also kind of just take them to the next level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, just like the monetary investment at the lower levels, I think that kind of investment is also important. If I'm not mistaken, there's a Bangladesh A tour coming up, so that's good. Also, the emerging team seems to play a lot of cricket. I think it's also because this emerging Asia Cup and those kinds of tournaments are coming up. So I think in Sri Lanka they do use the emerging team as kind of the A team. They don't have separate teams. So that is very important. I think the touring with those second teams are very important, because that's where you're supposed to get the experience of playing in different conditions against different opposition, right? Like, I mean, there is a rumor that Sri Lanka under 19s are going to travel to Australia for a tri series, just like they hosted Australia and England in Sri Lanka, which could be huge. I mean, I remember talking to Shashikala Sirivardhana in 2020, right? And she'd been in international cricket for 15 years. She told me she's toured Australia once. 15 years she's toured Australia once. That's because the women's championship came into place, right? So there was a series that Sri Lanka had to travel there. And then to think, a few years later you have your under 19s traveling to Australia for a series. That's absolutely what you need, right? Going forward, if you want to see success and see more development in the women's sport, then that's the way forward.
Absolutely. And even just looking at some of the future stars and players you're excited about, Estelle, from this domestic circuit, any names coming right at the top of your mind of names to, kind of look forward to?
I just think the reserves in the Asia Cup are definitely players to watch out for. Sachini Nisansala, I was very, very impressed with her when she played I think the World Cup qualifiers in 2021 or 2022. Good fielder, very, very smart with the way she bowls, and also very confident. And I think that is critically important for young players coming in, right? That confidence to be able to go out there and, not be intimidated by what is in front of you. Kavya Kavindi, she played one game in the series. I'm telling you, very, very impressive quick bowler. She can generate a bit of pace, can also bat, right? We haven't seen that. She can bat. I've seen in the nets. I mean, not clearing the boundary yet, but definitely can bat. Uh, Obviously, the 15-year-old is very good. Malsha Shehan is another one, not very young, maybe in her late 20s, but someone who can hit the ball hard, bowl a bit of off spin. So that's another kind of a utility player that you can use. Um, who are the other ones? Devmi Vihanga, another one who I think caught the eye in the under 19 setup, right? Just because of the way she was again able to clear those boundaries and also bowl a little bit of off spin, very, very much in the vein of Atapattu, I would say, even physically. So, those are some of the players. Like I said, a lot of them are very young. So, that middle, I don't know what happened to that generation. Like 26 to 32 just went missing. But everyone else, there are definitely some promising players in that age group.
And actually, just a follow up question here. Of course, there is talent and they are kind of making the most of all their opportunities. But just looking at the landscape of franchise cricket as well, I think besides Chamari, you don't see a lot of these Sri Lankan players, get opportunities to play franchise cricket. So, Estelle, do you think, the time has to change? We will see a lot more Sri Lankan cricketers getting those opportunities to play franchise cricket, and that time is also not too far away considering the talent that's available.
You know, franchise cricket has made me very, what can I say, pessimistic, because how long did it take for them to pick Atapattu, right? And she's been consistently good right throughout. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, the big tournaments are with the big three, and they don't really pay attention to the other teams unless they're playing their team, right? So a lot of these performances against like a West Indies or a New Zealand is going to go unnoticed. That's why it's important to perform against, like, you look at the men's side of things, right? I can give you an example, someone like Dilshan Madhushankar. Um, that delivery he bowled to Rohit Sharma in the 50 over World Cup, it got him a an IPL contract. I mean, I don't know if anyone can deny that it was at the biggest stage against the biggest team, against their captain, because everyone's watching that, not just India and Sri Lanka, everyone's watching that. So I think for the girls as well, that is the challenge, where performing against the big three teams. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka haven't played Australia in this cycle of the women's championship, but they've played England in England. I think that is the reason that Athapattu got the 100. She was bought at the 100 auction, and they've just beaten India in the Asia Cup. So I think people will have their eye on Kavisha Dilhari. I mean, Chamari Athapattu has been talking about Kavisha as a as a franchise cricketer for maybe 4 to 5 years now. She's been talking about her a lot. I think now's probably, I mean, there's no better time to pick her now, because like Sachini, I was talking about before, Kavisha is immensely confident in her abilities. She's not someone who backs down. I think to a lot of Indian fans, they remember her debut, not her debut series, but one of her early series where she lap swept a boundary against India to win that game. I think a lot of Indian fans remember that because it was such a anomaly for a Sri Lankan, a young, I think she may have been 17, 18 years old, in that situation to play that shot to win the game. So she is immensely confident. She will bring, I think, a lot of fire to any team she plays in. And, you can't deny her ability, right? With the ball and the bat. How rare is it? You have a bowler who can bowl any phase, who can bowl a bit of leg spin with her off spin, right? And someone who can clear the boundary late in the inning. So if you are from a franchise and watching this, don't look at her overall record. Look at like the last 12 months or something, because she's been incredible for Sri Lanka.
Definitely, I think there is no dearth of talent in Sri Lanka. It's just about getting those right opportunities, and I hope scouts and all of these people who spot talent are looking at the Sri Lankan girls, not just the Asia Cup, but performances over the past year as well. But Esther, I think earlier in our conversation as well, we had spoken about this transition bit, but just looking at the Sri Lankan squad as well, as you rightly said, it's like an aging squad, and you have young players as well. And you look at the aging players, you of course have Inoshi Priyadarshini, you have Udeshika Prabodhini, Achini Kulasurya, then you have Sugandhika Kumari, then you have Nirakshi D. Silva. I mean, the list is endless. You see all of these players who are on the not so good side of the 30 of their 30s. And so far, you've mentioned, that the kind of mindset that's there in the administration, they kind of ensure this transition happens very seamlessly. But even just looking at this pool of players, I mean, what do you look? I mean, what do you think would be their time span? To just play those World Cups and then kind of hand the baton to the younger girls coming in, or will we see something a little more, like more a better transition where a few of them retire, a few of them are still there, just hand holding and yeah, the thoughts are the same.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's very funny to think about it, because Udeshika Prabodhini, I thought, had retired in 2020 after the World Cup, because she was sobbing after the game, the last game Sri Lanka played at that World Cup. And Shashikala Sirivardhana was obviously retiring. So we all assumed that she was also done, because at that point she was 35, if I'm not mistaken, or 34, right? And she's here, still here, 2024. She's still Sri Lanka's best pace bowler. She's still the best left arm bowler in the world. There aren't that many around the world. She's still the best. Um, so it's very difficult to put a timeline, because I feel like the way they're going, if they're fit and they're performing, then why do you need to make that change? Because you can always kind of what can I say, like layer it out, the transition, because it's not going to be easy losing all of those players at once, right? I mean, Sugantika is probably going to play for a few more years. She's, I think, 32 or 33. Atapatu is openly said she's ready to go. So 50 over World Cup next year. I don't know. She's really fit. She's really fit. Achini Kulasurya, I'm not sure of. So it's very difficult to give a timeline. I do hope that it is kind of systematic and it's handled properly. At the same time, uh, it's important also not to be afraid to leave out those players and not depend on their legacy to keep them in the side, which is what I think it's great to see with um, Inoka Ranavira and Oshadi Ranasinghe. Inoka Ranavira, I'm still on the fence about her being left out, because I mean, in 2023, she was in the ICC Team of the Year, right? But with Oshadi Ranasinghe, with the decline of form, and she's sudden, like, her comeback has been incredible, right, since last year. Uh, they've been brave enough to leave out those senior players, because if things had gone south with Sachin Nisansala or in the semi-final, if Sri Lanka had lost that game, I'm sure there would have been conversations about experience in the bowling attack, right? Because you don't have, like, Inoka Ranavira has been one of Sri Lanka's best bowlers over the last decade, right? So there would definitely have been conversations about that. So I like the way that they have also been fearless in leaving out certain players, and they've kept on play. They've not kind of been like, okay, you're too old, you don't play, but you're performing well, we keep you in the team. As long as that you're meeting the criteria we need, and I think fielding is also a criteria for the team, because all the senior players who are in are pushed to be their best on the field. As long as you're performing well, I don't think it should be an issue, but we'll have to wait and see, I think, until next year, if if we do see that mass kind of retirement. But I will say, I spoke to Atapattu earlier this year, and she said, if we win a World Cup, I will retire that day. So, I mean, T20 World Cup coming up. I don't know. Do we want Sri Lanka to win or not? Because we definitely want her to stay on, but we also want to win the World Cup. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I think 2025 will probably be the big decider because you don't want players retiring now when you have a World Cup coming in less than a year, right?
Absolutely. And, I almost had my heart in my mouth when you said that about Chamari. I mean, I don't know which side of the fence would we want to see ourselves, but I hope, the best happens. And, she will continue to serve Sri Lanka cricket in, I think, a lot of capacities, even if she's not, captaining the side. But, anyways, we're not ready to have the conversation yet, emotionally not prepared for it. So, let's have a look at the comments section. Janvi goes on to add, hello, folks. Great conversation so far. Estelle, a question for you. What are your thoughts on who all are likely leaders during the transition? So Janvi is also like us looking right into the future. So thoughts on this, Estelle? Who could be possible leaders or that leadership group sort of thing to just ease through that transition?
I think they've very clearly identified Harshita Samaravikrama as a future captain. She's been mentored by, Shashikala Sirivardhana, and also obviously Chamariyata Pattu. Very interestingly, she was named vice captain a couple of years ago, I think, but is no longer vice captain. Anushka Sanjeevani is vice captain. I think that is not because of a lack of faith in Harshita, but also a way of, giving her time to grow and, learn in the job. Sorry, not without having that kind of responsibility on her shoulders. But I do think she is being groomed as one of the leaders. I think Kavisha Dilhari is another one. Like I said, if this everything to be liked about her, right? The way she plays, but also her attitude and the way she goes about things, very encouraging. So those two, I think, would be the ones kind of right at the top of that. But like I said, that it's an interesting question because again, coming back to that missing generation, technically you would have been looking at someone in that age group, right, to take over. Someone maybe 28, 29 years old, mature enough to kind of handle the younger players, but also the older players in the side. So that'll be interesting, but certainly those two will be involved.
Certainly, and let's hope this transition happens very seamlessly, and we don't see again very fluctuating fortunes. But Esther, almost as we reach the end of our discussion as well, I think I have to ask you this question of the Women's T20 World Cup that's coming up. So, what are you most looking forward to, and what do you reckon are Sri Lanka's chances? Because it's easy, to get just carried away with the Asia Cup triumph and be like, Sri Lanka will make it to the knockouts and this and that. I think even Chamari, so many of her pressers, I remember during that South Africa series, talking about winning the qualifiers and eventually, just
Mm.
aiming for that World Cup as well. So, as a fan, as an expert, as a journalist, do you also echo similar sentiments as your skipper?
I think it's very important to separate the Asia Cup from the final, sorry, the World Cup, because I think it's important to enjoy this win. It's an incredible achievement from a team that has been incredible over the last couple of years, but it's also important to be realistic about what's happening in the future. Sri Lanka, I mean, there's a very real chance that Sri Lanka goes into the World Cup and loses 4 games, right? There is a real chance that that could happen. They've beaten New Zealand, they've beaten Pakistan, they've beaten India, but that doesn't guarantee that they will beat them at the World Cup. And I think they understand that that it's important not to get ahead of yourself and think that okay, we've beaten them, so we are going to beat them. We can beat them. That is the attitude they're going in with. That you know nobody believed that the Asia Cup win was possible, but they've achieved that. So how could you not believe that they could make it to the knockouts, right? I think if it happens, if they do make it to the knockouts, I don't think it will be a surprise. So that itself speaks to how much they've progressed, because you have to remember they are also in what many people would term as the tougher group at the World Cup, right? Like if you look at world cricket and how the women's game has gone in the last couple of years, you'd probably be kind of putting Sri Lanka with maybe South Africa as the fourth best team in the world, right? But unfortunately, they are in a group where you've got India and Australia, who are pretty much like everybody's expecting to be nailed on semi-finalists, right? So it's going to be tough, and I think it's important that they understand that. I think they do understand that. It's important for fans to understand that, because you have a lot of new fans, right, who are coming in with only the background of men's cricket, where there have been lots of achievements in the past, right? Whereas for women, it's the situation is very different. So beating India in a Asia Cup final is their greatest achievement ever, right? There hasn't been a title victory that can, compete with that. So I'm not saying it was a fluke or anything. I'm saying that they have to be realistic about it not being a given that they will beat these teams at the World Cup. So it'll be interesting to see. The only thing I think, which I would say is a huge compliment, is that if they do beat India or Australia in the World Cup, or get through to the semis, I don't think it will be as massive a surprise as uh, we would have thought maybe 2 years ago, right? A team coming from the qualifiers, having to play the qualifiers and coming in. So that's the biggest kind of compliment I would say for the team. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy, and I think conditions are also going to be tough. Um, I just, like I said before, all you can ask for is to play well, right? And whatever happens, happens, and that's the only thing you can hope for from a team.
Estelle here, being cautiously optimistic, I must say, not looking too far ahead.
One
But I
game
think
at a time, right? I'm following Chamari Pattu's lead. It's their mantra. So one game at a time, they just have to take it that one step forward, because it can, like you said, it can be overwhelming, right? Thinking about,
yeah,
because we've had a very very similar situation in the men's side. 2022, they win the Asia Cup, immediately go into the World Cup, lose all the games, and come back home with disappointment. So it's important to kind of keep yourself in check of what you can do, and not get too ahead of yourself and start thinking about making it to the semifinals before you've even played a game.
exactly. That does make sense. And let's take this quick comment as well that goes on to say spinners' healthy pitches in Bangladesh will help Sri Lankan bowlers to do their best. And Australia and New Zealand are not at their best at Asian pitches, I guess so. So, still your thoughts on this? Because as much as we look at Sri Lanka, India, and Bangladesh, all our subcontinent teams, even the likes of Australia and New Zealand, right? They do have their fair share of struggles in like surfaces that spin a lot. I mean, Australia is a separate breed because recently they just defeated Bangladesh 5-0, did not show any signs of trouble against spin. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, see, with New Zealand, I think New Zealand is in a very difficult situation. They do seem like a declining side, right? Because they've been struggling um, all around the world. They are no longer. I mean, there was a time where they were in the top three in the world, right? I don't think they're anywhere close to that right now. So for them, it might be tough. I don't think it's going to be tough for Australia, because even if they're, I mean, I don't expect their batters to find it tough, but they've got some fantastic spinners in their lineup as well. So I wouldn't. I mean, they could end up having a horrible tournament. I don't know, right? But I don't expect that to happen, because Australia, if we know anything, is that they're going to be prepared, and particularly, I think they're going to take it very hard that. A lot of people are putting England and India above them in this tournament. So I'm sure they'll be well prepared to take on the spinning pitches.
Definitely, and we are in for mouth-watering clashes through that World Cup because the conditions are going to be very challenging, going to bring the best out of all of these players. And Janani goes on to add, Estelle talking like the skipper, take each day as it comes. We abide by Chamari's philosophy. And yeah, Estelle, I promise this will be my last question to you. But do you have any final thoughts for the Sri Lankan fans worldwide, admirers of women's cricket on this win, and yeah, just your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I think it's like I said before. I think it's important to be realistic, not get ahead of yourselves in terms of, what's going to happen and what Sri Lanka is going to do at the World Cup. But also, I think it's finally come a time where we can believe that the Sri Lankan team can do something special. And even if it doesn't happen, that, just back them, because they've given us something that, you know we weren't expecting. I don't think, again, I'll say it again, I don't, if you know someone who was predicting the Sri Lanka win in that Asia Cup final, please introduce me to that person, because I just have to know what the thinking is. Just back them. I think they're a team who are good to watch. They play a exciting brand of cricket now. They, put their heart and soul into the game. So so support them, but don't like get ahead of yourselves. Enjoy the Asia Cup win, but leave it at that. Yeah.
That is a fitting conclusion, Estelle. Not getting ahead of ourselves is advice. I think that works in all areas of life. So, to all our viewers watching in as well, we hope this advice sticks with you. And yeah, guys, that pretty much does conclude our discussion. First up, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Estelle for joining us, sharing some remarkable insights, backstories, and so much. I'm sure we could have spoken for at least 3 more hours about a lot of backstories, but we understand attention spans and we acknowledge it. So but thank you, Estelle, for sharing those lovely insights, and to all our viewers who joined in today, asking those remarkable questions, sharing your perspectives. Thank you so much for that. It definitely helped the flow of our conversation as well. And the plan is to do a lot of these live shows, not just focus on India cricket, to look at world cricket, because it is such an interesting space, and women's cricket, because there's so much happening. So guys, don't forget to follow and subscribe to Never on the Back Foot. I find this the toughest, to market Never on the Back Foot, but if you guys are here, just press that subscribe button, and yeah, let's just be on this journey together and see where this kind of goes. While you're at it, do follow Estelle on Twitter as well. She posts some amazing insights and always has very different takes and perspectives. So I'm sure you will find that an enjoyable experience as well. And yeah, guys, that's all for now from us. Thank you so much. Take care and good night. Thank you, Estelle.
Thanks so much for having me, Neha. I mean, I love talking about the women's team and their journey, because I think a lot of people need to know more about them. So thanks for having me.
Cheers, Estelle.